Hi friends, Eric again here talking about the video games things of what I've might be been doing over, I don't know, last 2 weeks? I think it's been 2 weeks. Yeah, a lot of things are going on that have nothing to do with making video games, which makes making video games a bit difficult right now. So, yeah, trying my best to still keep everything going in some way or another. Anyway, let's talk about the things that are more interesting. Virtua 7, as always, please buy the game. Would be cool if people buy the game, because, you know, I think it's neat. I submitted the game to the IGF this week, not because of expectations, mostly because of trying to force like video games as like a whole thing to pay attention, at least to some degree, to what I've been doing. It's like mostly motivated by spite, and sometimes that's a fair thing to do. But yeah, like in the process of like putting the submission together, obviously I had to like look at the game again. Also noticed that I never uploaded the final release trailer of the game to YouTube, which is, yeah, apparently I forgot to do that. So I did that. And yeah, just like as like I was like in a place at the beginning of the week. I still kind of am in a place emotionally. So it was like, it was a bit of a rough moment, just like to see, wow, I put so much energy and so much stuff into this. And yeah, I would like for more people to like see it and notice it, for like especially. But what can you do? But yeah, please buy the game. The discount's over. It was discounted last week. Thanks for like those people who bought the game during that period of time. So yeah, and like all of my other games as well. In that respect, but as always, if you've bought the game, played the game, and had a decent time with it, like leave a positive review on Steam. Would be cool. Just so that this awful no review threshold thing that Steam does is kind of like at least a little bit removed. I know that 10 reviews, well, it used to be that like 10 years ago something that 10 reviews was like the big thing. I think at least this is like something I heard back then. Like in around like early 2015, I think. But yeah, now it's like 50 or 100 or like I don't fucking know. It overall, in the grand scheme of things, people buying the game is still like enough and cool. But like if you have like time on your hand and haven't done so and like have played the game and all these things, please leave a review. It will most likely help. And that's cool. But yeah, let's talk about JRPG game, which is mostly more fulfilling and more satisfying right now. But yeah, so dialogue exists now. That's like the big thing that I got into the game over the last 2 weeks. It was a bit of a struggle again because of like other things happening and me just not really being in a state where I like could do that. Yeah, so it took 2 weeks to get it all done, and I'm pretty sure it's not where it should be in terms of like tone and quality and everything. But in general, I think it is probably a bit easier for me to get the tone and the quality right instead of like getting it in the game. I think like at least the process is a bit less like a bit less like a process of like having to overcome like some kind of internal resistance to like actually write something. So that's a bit of a like kind of like a relief, and also something like I wrote the last 2 scenes yesterday, and after I was done, it was like there wasn't really any sense of like, wow, cool, I did that, isn't that cool? But more like, yeah, it's there, and that's good. It's like one further step towards like this being something. And also let me zoom in closer. I have no idea how well these things are like look on video, but I think it's readable. Should be readable. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about like other things. So last Saturday, I saw a blog post by Kyle Labriola, who I know from co-host. It's like so nice how you like co-host created like new connections to people, and in a way, and then like still following them around as much as you can. And anyway, like he seems to be also working on like some kind of like JRPG-ish game, and wrote a blog post about, well, how do you make battles, or like create like a battle system and moves and other things. And like his post was mostly focused on like the potential risk of fights being boring because, well, players repeat the same moves each battle, and like everything kind of getting stale and monotonous and all that kind of stuff. And then talking about how he addressed these potential problems in his own project. I wrote a whole response blog post. It was over 2,000 words long about this, and I'm gonna link it in the video. So I'm not gonna. I hope I'm not going to like go through the whole thing again here, like in a much more like rambly fashion. But please, like, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, read like Kyle's blog post and my response to it, because it's like there are like several different like interesting things here. First of all, I mean, in general, seeing two people with different like approaches and perspectives on the whole thing, that's one thing. And also like how like basically having different base assumptions, or like a different like central question, or like that govern your like decision making process, like when you're making a game, how this can then lead to like first of all looking at design elements in a different way, but also then like figuring out like different solutions to them, or like considering things, or like regarding things as potential problems, or not regarding them as potential problems. Again, it's an interesting thing, and it just like shows how like you can have different approaches and perspectives on things. And like the important part is that like in a way that like you find an approach where you're deliberate in your decision making process as well. Like where you have like some kind of like logical process that you like follow, that leads you to like going down a specific path, instead of like doing things because, I don't know, Final Fantasy did them, without ever really thinking about why Final Fantasy might have done something fairly specific. But that's like deeply vague. But like again, this then gave me the idea, and like why not talk a little bit about battles in general, like in this video. I mean, I did a lot of that stuff. I probably did a lot of that stuff like a few months ago here as well. But like earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, I did also a video where I talked about like the initial idea, like the initial push of like what I wanted to make, and like how I was like trying to approach like a JRPG in like a larger sense. And I'm pretty sure I also talked about battles there, because battles are very important when you're making these games. It's like one thing that like Kyle just said, that like I'm pretty sure it's not like his opinion about this all, it's just like a way of like describing like a general thing, where he talked about players kind of like pushing towards like efficiency, and like getting random encounters out of the way as quickly as possible. And he said players trend towards that because they want to get back to the actual game. So in a way that like a random encounter in a JRPG or like a non-boss encounter, non in quote story encounter is like something is being perceived as and treated as something that's not really part of the game and more like a time-wasting nuisance. And again, I'm not saying that Kyle thinks like that or like treats it like that or anything. It's just like a general like perception. And frankly, I occasionally in some games think that as well. Like some JRPGs that I've played where like a random encounter got triggered and my first reaction was rolling my eyes because like, oh god, here we go again. And it's an interesting thing, right? And which then led me to like the point of like saying that no, they're not like something that sits outside of the game. They are the game. Like the game happens in these things, and like obviously everything is connected and related to one another. But like if you're making a JRPG game that has like minor encounters in them, be they random or set or whatever, you have to build the game with those in mind and around them in some way, so that it's not something that is being perceived as an afterthought, that is perceived as something that keeps you from the actual, in quotes, real game. Because if that's the case, if the real game is everything but the random encounters or but the fights, then get rid of the fights. Why make a game about turn-based battles when you're not interested in them? But yeah, anyway, that's a larger thing. And again, just like talking about it a little bit more because it was relevant, and like something I wrote back in January in like in this first foray into this, and this is still something that is very much at the heart of like how I approach battles and how I approach the game in general. And this is like how I describe basically what a JRPG battle is in its essence. Because of this abstract nature and the connection they create between the game's narrative framing and its underlying system, at their most basic level, battles are moments of dramatic significance. It's where characters and their obstacles act upon each other using their own descriptive qualities and powers. Which then leads me to the conclusion, or that's kind of like the main thing of like that I keep saying, that I'm saying even longer than like all of this writing exists, is like anything can be a battle. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. If you want basically to put the dramatic camera on it. One example I bring up in my blog post and in general is like I mentioned here, the checkpoint resting scenes in my game, in this project, are battles. In the code, they are battles. The framing is different, obviously, because it's not like something where the player party is like fighting a bunch of like frogs or something. But the entire interaction system and the rules that govern everything are a battle. Right now, I'm not doing that much with it, but there's there's obviously a space to explore, and something that you can use for like dramatic expression and characterization and all these kinds of things. And where there's right now, like narratively, where this distinction in some way or another like comes out the most is in the term that I've built the writing, and now I'm once again forgetting what I was talking about like 2 weeks ago or whenever, was that maybe I just said, I have an interesting idea. I don't know. So the way I've set up the narrative in this game is that there's basically like a conflicting perspective thing happening, where the overall narration, the things that are being talked about in cutscenes and like when you're walking around in the dungeon or like in quotes overworld map, is being done by a character that has a very specific like perspective. First of all, looks back at the events of like what plays out in the game, and also has a very specific perspective on like what has happened there. that may or may not really reflect of like what actually happened. Whereas, and that's what happens basically in the top-down camera stuff. In the battles, or like there are no scenes where like characters are talking to each other. There is no characterization really happening in these moments. The characterization and the display of like relationships between characters and their motivations and like who they are, all of that I want to do and like is basically being done in battle sequences. Because again, battles are moments of dramatic significance. They say something about the characters that are in them. The way the characters act in moments of like dramatic pressure says something about them. And I wanted to really like push this contrast in some way or another. And again, like the writing needs work because writing is hard. But the intention of me is like to really have like this split in a way where like it's in part it's really ambivalent, where like the characters talk about the events that like they go through in a perspective and in a way that is not really being supported by like the other bits of narration because it's coming from a different perspective. And this is why again like treating the rest scenes as battles is important, because like that again opens them up for usage in these very character-focused moments as opposed to like this zoomed-out version. Like the narrator of the game has no idea about the character's interiority, or about especially the player character's interiority. So the only moments where like this comes out is again either in battles and the actions that the characters perform in battles, and like in the resting scenes, because these are like the moments where like the focus shifts more towards them. That's like the entire idea. It's like something I'm again really excited about to like try and explore. It's like deeply scary for me to explore because again it like involves storytelling. And as much as I like thinking about it and as much as I like the idea of doing it, it is terrifying for me to actually attempt. So it's hard for me to stay with this. I want to stay with this because I really believe there's something cool that can be done with this if you like really push these parts forward and really play around with the potential that lies in them, or like more or less to like at least explore if there's any potential. It might be that it's not there. It might be that I'm completely wrong with this view of like battles are a moment of dramatic significance and like you can basically use them for anything you want because they're a framing device and like primarily a framing device and this stuff like this. But anyway, another so that was like very just like, and again like what I really liked about Kyle's post is that it got me thinking again about this kind of stuff. There's like this thing where like sometimes you think about a specific problem or a specific element of something, and you come to a point where you think, yeah, okay, the problem is done. I know what this is. And what I really liked about Kyle's post is it kind of like forced me to really think about this, because again there were like parts in the way he approached the topic that I didn't agree with. So when you don't agree with something, you kind of have to figure out okay, why do I not agree with that? What's my position here exactly? And how do these positions differ? Where's like what's really at the core of like the differences here, and like and how again and what else follows then from these disagreements? And that's it was like pretty cool to like go through this again because one thing I noticed, like, so it was about again how to avoid like people spamming moves, and like one of my ideas here, and this is like something again which you will see in my project, is so Kyle's approach is basically to like create depth via like as far as I understand it, via like move variation and like playing with like resistances and like stats and stuff like that. That stuff also exists in my project. However, it kind of like all like moves towards like a very specific, you like try to make the basic attack work against this enemy, and way less like find different ways for that. And so it is, in a way, my project is much more monotonous because, well, attacking works. Where I'm trying to like work in variation is in how you deal with enemy formations and like deal with specific types of enemies and like approaches to them and like prioritizing specific enemies and all that kind of stuff. And in trying to figure this stuff out and trying to like explain this stuff to me, I realized why the rodent that ruins your day is actually good game design. Like, disclaimer, the phrase good game design is a lie, doesn't exist. It all depends on intention and context and execution and all that kind of stuff, because good is not like an objective normative qualifier. It is a subjective human like adjective. So and it can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. However, it's a nice way to like say something like silly, like in a very hyperbolic way, which is why I said the rodent that ruins your day is good game design. First of all, what is the rodent that ruins your day? The best recent example is in Dungeon Encounters, which has an enemy in it that is a small mouse that steals your money. And Dungeon Encounters also has a mechanic where you can go into debt. And well, the mouse steals all your money and puts you into debt, and then you cannot buy any items for quite a while. And it also has like, I think 50,000 HP or something like that. What nobody really talks about, the Dungeon Encounters has like an even worse rodent, which is a hamster that like turns you into rats, which is very hard to like get rid of. Who has, I think, 50 million HP or something like that. But anyway, there's like another good example. It's squirrels are rodents, I think. Yeah, they're like the like where people get tripped up is that rabbits and like hares aren't rodents. They're lagomorphs. But in Final Fantasy V, there's like a fairly famous enemy called the Skull Eater, which shows up like in a very specific cave where like most enemies are just like very harmless squirrels that don't really do much to you. And then there's the Skull Eater, who looks slightly different from like the regular squirrel, and who like murders you. Like really just murders you. And it is... I personally find these fights funny. And I find the idea behind them funny. JRPG game has at least 3 different kinds of these. And I've been trying to figure out why I'm okay with something deeply with the existence of something that's in a way deeply unfair to the players. In this specific context, while I'm like fairly opposed to it, or was fairly opposed to it, like in platformers. Like I never really, like I'm not a fan of like, I don't know, like having like a random spike come out of nowhere and kill the player or something like that, because I always felt it's just like boring and like more frustrating than anything else. However, each time I ran into like these types of like enemies in a JRPG, I was delighted, even though they've like ruined my day. And I think what's going on here, and like several things, like one reason why I think these exist is like as a way to like, and this goes back to another phrase of mine, to punish hubris, to like make sure, like to kind of like show the players, okay, you might think that you're like really good and really in control of everything, but like you're not. And here we have an enemy that just like hits you very hard, and you can't really do anything about that. So to kind of like push a perspective shift on the player. And then like in a way, what I'm saying now is like a bit of like an expansion on that. And I think like another way of like why these serve a purpose actually in these games is that like if you imagine like you have a game with random encounters and like you very quickly realize, wait a second, I can't just basically press the attack button over and over again, get through the encounter, do the next one, or I can just like run away from everything. You kind of get into this mode where you don't really pay attention to like the enemy formations and what the enemies do to you. And this is also like a source of monotony and in a wider sense like boredom or like I can't recall the word, but like in a wider sense of like a disinterest or like getting disinterested in the game itself. And what these and like again pulled from my blog post, I like mentioned Lufia 2 in that context. Like I'm playing it right now, and one thing I noticed is when I'm playing Lufia 2 and like get into an encounter, I rarely pay attention to like the enemy formations or like make an effort in like targeting a specific enemy first. It's just like, okay, like do the standard moves, attack, spell. Or like depending on party formation, like maybe it's 2 spells or no spell. But not really like paying attention to like, okay, what are the enemies doing? Like, oh, I have to get rid of this one first because like if I let this guy stay alive, they can move X, Y, and Z or whatever. And even though the enemies look different, because like in their actions they're like very indistinguishable, you stop really paying attention to them and stop caring. If you have occasionally a rare encounter or something that you run into, where like this approach, this like, oh, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm just like pressing A all the time, and then like sooner or later the fight will be over and everything will be fine. If you put an encounter in there where this doesn't work, well, like you press A 4 times and like you don't do no damage, and then the Skull Eater does 5,000 damage to one of your characters and murders them. You're like very violently put into a state where like, oh shit, I actually have to look at what's happening, which then in turn also leads to players potentially paying more attention to enemies in general. And even though it might not make a difference, they might start thinking about, oh wait a second, of these 4 enemies, this one specific enemy is the most threatening, so I'm gonna target them first. And like this might actually make not that much of a difference in terms of how long a fight takes in the end. It might make a difference of like 5 seconds per fight or something, but it still like starts like a process in the player of like paying more attention to like what's going on, and like kind of like then also paying more attention to like the non-Skull Eater fights, because they may suddenly realize, oh, in theory these people or these things could be hidden anywhere. Like if I'm running into an enemy and I don't really understand who they are, they could be something, it could do something like that. Right? So there's like in creating like this weird looming threat of like something that just like fucks you over, you kind of like put everything more into focus and like force more attention. That's at least my theory. I have no fucking clue. It could also be that like this is a side effect, and also like putting a rodent in there that just eats you is funny, which again is a fair thing to do, and like I deeply delight in that. I really do. I think it is part of like making a JRPG to have like monsters in there that are just evil, that are just deeply, deeply evil and ruin you. Like obviously not everything, but like occasionally have something in there to like just tell them, you know, I could be doing that all the time. So don't get arrogant. Don't think that you've solved things. Plus, it also then makes it fairly rewarding to, I don't know, go back to the place where like the first rodent exists and like just just take out your revenge because you're suddenly much stronger. Or like it gives you like the sense of like you might be able to do that. So that's why the rodent, why like kind of like figuring out like a game design purpose of these. Again, they don't have to have one. It could just be like, again, you can use, again, anything can be battle. So you can also use battles to like make fun of people or like to tell a joke. And in a way, the rodent that ruins your day is also just a practical joke that you perform on the player's expense. In a way, you just have to make sure that like the player is in on the joke to a degree and like isn't like, again, everyone's different. Some people might just hate it. Like a lot of people hate dungeon encounters because they have the thieving mouse in there. And again, I look at it and find it funny that people are pissed at this. Because, well, that's the whole point, right? Like the point of the mouse was to make people frustrated in some way, and it like really works. And like the problem is that like people took it a bit too serious, I guess. But anyway, that's like maybe at some point I might try and like submit a talk to like a game design conference about like the value of like the murder mouse. Who knows? We'll have to see how life goes, I guess, and how much I want to do that. But yeah, anyway, let's talk a little bit about like the rest of the game. This is like mostly stuff I did today because again, like week was rough and they will continue to be rough. So like I'm gonna take what I can get. So today I for the first time, I don't know, in a month, I actually played through the whole dungeon again with like a different perspective on it. Especially because, well, I was just thinking about like, okay, enemy formations and what could you do to like to play around with them. For example, like what you could also do to kind of like have a similar effect of like make people pay attention so that they don't just like mash the A button to put their commands in as quickly as possible, is to, for example, say you have an enemy formation of like three guys, two have like 50 HP and one has 300 HP, and the default cursor position is like the most left one. Depending on where you put the high HP enemy, like can vastly make difference in like how the fight goes, right? For example, you could, and the high HP enemy is very non-threatening, but like the low HP enemies have like very awful attacks. You could put the high HP enemy in the default cursor spot, so that if players who are just like mashing A will just attack the HP sponge, which means that the actually dangerous enemies get more turns in, which like hurt you, which is a drain on your resources, and then gets like the whole thing rolling. And this again get the stuff rolling where like the actual challenge and like the actual like interesting like decision making process starts kicking in. You could do it just like with where you place your enemies, and like how you combine the enemies that you have, right? There's like a lot of space where you can just play with these elements without even thinking about like, okay, what can the player do? So I was like playing through like my project right now and just like looking at the enemy formations that I have, like trying to like get a feel for like, okay, what can I do with this? What can I do with what is there already, and how can I, when do these encounters get difficult? When are they easier? And yeah, how can I kind of like play with these things? There are some encounters where where I've already like built them in a very specific way, but I think I can push this much more. And also like again like to understand like, okay, where's the like right now in the battle system, where's the focus? Like again, something I've noticed and talked about in the past, I'm pretty sure. But like again, and for me, it's something I want to push a bit more and like want to play out a bit more, is like this idea of like formation breaking. That the challenge, and then in that sense, the tactical death in a non-boss battle isn't coming from having like a very specific like a deeply involved like decision-making process in terms of like moves and like what like breaking enemy defense and all that kind of stuff, what other games are doing. But more about that very specific, okay, I have like these resources at my disposal. I have like an enemy formation that is like that with different stats and like different like HP values and like different levels of like perceived threat to my situation, and then making most of the difficulty and most of the decision making process around figuring out how to best get through these with as little damage to yourself as possible, and as little drain on your resources as possible. Or the other part again is like making the decision making process about which fights do I want to drain my resources on and which fights don't I want to drain my resources on, because that's like again like one of the reasons a default attack exists, because the default attacks never costs anything. You can just press the button and it happens. Whereas magic or items or whatever cost resources in some way or another. So that's like one part of like, first of all, I noticed that basically like and again, I'm pretty sure I said this already, but like the difficulty varies greatly depending on how you deal with these formations. There are like specific enemy formations where like if you let an enemy exist for longer than one turn, things go out of hand so quickly. Not because they're dangerous, but because they make the dangerous enemies almost untouchable. And which means you have to kind of like spend way more turns of like dealing with them, and more turns means more actions for the enemies, which means you get hit more, which again means you have to heal yourself or whatever. So there's like a lot of space there that doesn't have anything to do with like, okay, now we have like 800 spells that do all different things, and I kind of want to keep it that way, and in a way I'm also noticing a typo here. Wow. Currently fights are mostly about finding the most effective way to deploy violence against enemies. That's the most non-saying thing here in there, because well, it's kind of like saying, yeah, we won the game because we scored more points than the opponent. We won the fight because like we were very efficient in deploying violence. Yeah, sure. But it means because I'm like very like specific about the terminology in this project, this means something very specific here. And like it basically means figuring out ways how you can make enemies vulnerable against your default attack, because not everything is, but it is the most reliable and non-threatening way of like and like limitless way of like dealing with enemies. So you kind of have to like figure out ways and understand ways. Okay, like this approach might be the best, and like the next one, like a different fight might require you like a different thing, like depending on like also like what you want all of your other characters to be doing, aside from like maybe the one or two who are like doing most of the violence. So that's and again, this is trying to like figure out like a central thing I want to like build these encounters around and the decision making process around. Means now I can go like into it much more specifically, look at each fight, look at the enemies, look at the formations, and look at the sequence of like fights, because it's not always it's not this one fight, right? It's all about it's like it's the whole context of it, like how many fights have you already gone through, how many resources did you spend on those fights, how many fights are still left before you have a checkpoint where you can like heal yourself up and like replenish some of your items or whatever else you might be doing. So looking at it all and like trying to figure out like a sequence and like like an overall thing I want to go for. It's kind of like something I want to do next. So like really think about this, really, and like especially like what I want to do is like I want to have like at least one formation that I repeat where while I changes the position of one enemy. Like, is it like in the default position? Is it in the second position or the third position? Just like to play around with it. I don't really know how players would respond to it, but to just like put it out there, just to see, would this be enough to like make the perception of like difficulty differ? And I'm pretty sure it does. But yeah, in a lot of ways, this whole thing, and this is maybe the last thing to say that I noticed, like after reading Kyle's post last week, is how much of like this entire project is an experiment of mine for like all of these ideas. This idea of anything can be a battle. You can change difficulty in fights just by like changing enemy positioning without touching anything else. And like it's in a way both an experiment and also like a weird like, I don't like, I'm always like hesitant with these words because like I'm not sure if I like understand the meaning of them correctly, but kind of like a deconstruction of it all. Like if I say anything can be a battle, it is in a sense like a deconstruction of like a JRPG battle in the JRPG system as it is, right? Because usually these mean like very like in these games very specific things. We're just like, yeah, well, you hit the other thing with the sword. You don't have to. Like, you really don't have to. Like, it can be anything, because like, well, at the end, what you're doing is like you change words, and like the words change the context. You change like in the graphics and whatever. But yeah, that's the stand of it. Like the status of it all. It's again, it's all a bit rough right now. I put the good old like this is like part of like the Virtuous 7, I think. Devlogs try to not fall into despair, which is like a topic right now. It's like it's rough. I'm doing my best. This thing is still a joy to think about. I had fun thinking about all of this week and writing the post, and made me again remember myself like, oh, this is why this is cool. And this is why I really want to again push all of this, because I haven't even touched the whole how could you do overworld exploration like in that context, could you do RPG towns in that context, and there's like I really with this stuff, and I really want to like kind of like and again I think I said this already, but let's say it again. I want to pick up each element, look at it, like rotate it around, and like wonder, okay, what could this be? What is this? What could this be? And how can I use it? Like, what function can I have this fulfill? Outside of like what's usually expected of it to fulfill. How can I use it for like this very specific thing I want to do, which is like really push this aspect of like using these systems in like JRPGs and like the convention of JRPGs as like a very specific dramatic storytelling instrument. Who knows how this goes? As I said, in a way it's an experiment for myself and like for a lot of other things, but it's fun. And sometimes it's cool to do things that are fun. And yeah. See you around at some point. I don't know if I'll do another one next week. It really depends on like how everything goes, but I'll try. As we can see, like I always find things to talk about. That's never the problem. But yeah, see you around, everyone. Have a good week. Goodbye.